I still remember the exact shade of that green. It wasn't the color of a drink, it was the color of a decision. Most people think danger sounds like a gunshot. It doesn't. In the world of the elite, danger sounds like the polite clink of ice against glass. It sounds like Douglas Creed, a man whose last name was a lie, whispering a joke while his eyes stayed cold. I was standing 3 feet away, my back straight, my uniform a second skin. My job was to watch the door, but my eyes, they've always had a mind of their own. I didn't see a business associate offering a toast. I saw a predator testing a trap. Beside Creed sat Sung-Jin Park. To the room, he was just the silent partner from Seoul. A man they treated like a piece of furniture, useful, but beneath notice. They laughed at his accent. They talked over him as if he were a ghost. And the most disturbing part, he let them. He sat in that black water stillness, accepting their microaggressions with a calm that made my skin crawl. He was too still, like a storm that had already decided where it was going to land. Voice drops to a whisper stop for a second. Look at your own life. Have you ever stood by and watched someone be humiliated because it wasn't your business? Have you ever felt that burn in your chest telling you to speak up, but you stayed silent to protect your own peace? If you've ever regretted the moment you didn't act, subscribe, join us, because this story is for the ones who finally decided to stop looking away. Now, let me tell you why I chose to lose everything for a man I didn't even know. Creed leaned in, pushing that green glass toward Sung-Jin. To a long and quiet partnership, Creed said. The irony was thick enough to choke on. My brain hadn't authorized the move yet, but my body was already there. I didn't shout. I didn't cause a scene. I simply placed my hand over the top of the glass. The music seemed to stutter. Creed's smile didn't fall, it curdled. "Is there a problem, Officer Davis?" he asked. His voice was like silk over a blade. I didn't look at Creed, I looked at Sung-Jin. For the first time, he looked back. His eyes weren't full of fear. They were full of inventory. He wasn't surprised I stopped the drink. He was calculating the cost of my soul. "Don't take that drink," I whispered. I knew in that moment my career was over. I knew the moral cause I lived by was about to become my own executioner. The consequence of doing the right thing is rarely a trophy. Usually, it's a bill you can't pay. 3 days after the gala, I was standing in a pawn shop. The man behind the counter offered me $340 for my grandfather's watch. It was worth thousands. But worth and value had stopped being the same thing the morning I was terminated for insubordination. My phone rang, a private number. "Ms. Davis," a voice said. It was Harlan Voss, the man who groomed the powerful. "The client you protected. He found your intervention intriguing." "He's a ghost, Harlan," I replied, looking at the empty space on my wrist where my history used to sit. "He let those men treat him like a dog." "Did he?" Voss's voice went low, coded. "Or was he simply giving them enough rope to hang themselves? He wants to see you. 4:00 p.m. Don't be late." When I walked in, he didn't turn. He finished his paragraph. That was my first lesson. Sung-Jin Park finishes what he starts before he acknowledges the world. "You lost your position for a man you don't like," he said, his back still to me. "I didn't do it for you," I said, my voice steady despite the hole in my bank account. "I did it because it was wrong." He turned then. He didn't look like a victim anymore. The small man from the gala was gone. In his place was something ancient and heavy. He walked toward me, and for a second I thought he was going to threaten me. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He set it on the table. Inside was my grandfather's watch. "You have the seeing in your eyes, Jennifer," he whispered. It was the first time he used my name. But in my world, the seeing usually gets people killed. Tell me, are you ready to see what's actually behind that green glass? I looked at the watch, then at him. I realized then that the drink wasn't the poison. The poison was the world he lived in, and he had just invited me to be the only person allowed to hold the antidote. I've learned that the most dangerous people in the world don't scream. They don't need to. They carry their power like a loaded gun, silent heavy, and always pointed at the floor until the moment it isn't. When I walked into Sungjin Park's private residence for our official first meeting, I was exactly 4 minutes early. Not 5, not 3, 4. It's a habit from my tactical days. Being early is a shield. It lets you map the room before the room maps you. He was sitting by the window, a slim hardcover book held loosely in his right hand. He didn't turn when the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me. He didn't acknowledge my presence with a nod or a glance. He just kept reading. Most people would have felt insulted. I felt warned. This was my first real lesson in the hierarchy of his world. Sungjin Park finishes what he is doing before he acknowledges your existence. It wasn't about being rude. It was about order. It was about showing me that in this space, his time was the only currency that mattered. "Ms. Davis," he finally said. His voice was like a low-frequency hum, the kind you feel in your bones before you hear it in your ears. "You're 4 minutes early." "I'm always 4 minutes early," I replied. I didn't move. I didn't fidget. I stood there like the soldier I was trained to be, even though my heart was doing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He closed his book and set it on the side table. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a business manual or a book on strategy. It was a Korean language Bible. The leather was scuffed, the spine cracked and held together by what looked like years of desperate use. He caught me looking. For a split second, the cold mask slipped, and I saw something else. A flicker of grief so old it had become part of his DNA. "The file says you're a hero, Jennifer," he said, standing up. He was taller than he looked sitting down. He moved with a grace that was almost feline, deadly, and effortless. "But heroes usually end up in graves or pawn shops. Which one are you looking for?" I didn't flinch. "I'm just looking to do my job." He walked toward me, stopping just inches away. I could smell cedarwood and something metallic, like rain on hot asphalt. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my eyes, searching for the seeing he had mentioned before. "You'll report only to me," he whispered. "Not to the men who hired you, not to the world outside these walls. If you see something you don't understand, keep seeing it. But don't speak, not until I tell you the truth." My mother used to say that you can tell everything about a man by what he hides in the corners of his home. Sung Jin's penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, but tucked away near the service entrance, where the staff wouldn't think to look, was a single framed verse. "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil." Psalm 23. In the margin, in small, faded handwriting that looked soft and feminine, were 4 words. He kept his word, Jin. "Ama." "Ama, mother." My chest tightened. I thought about my own mother, Claudette, and the way she used to braid my hair at the kitchen table while talking about the doing in my hands. I realized then that Sung Jin and I weren't just employer and employee. We were both children of women who believed in a god that the world had forgotten. But the emotional connection was a luxury I couldn't afford. My job was protection, and the threat was getting louder. I spent my first night on the detail cross-referencing the staff files Jin had given me. I found something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Harlan Voss, the man who supposedly found me, had been receiving payments from an offshore account linked to a criminal network in Seoul. A network that Sung Jin was supposedly a partner in. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Voss wasn't Jin's ally. He was his jailer. And I wasn't just a bodyguard. I was the outsider Voss had handpicked because he thought I would be easy to manipulate. He thought a black woman struggling to pay her bills wouldn't ask questions as long as the checks cleared. He underestimated the one thing he couldn't see. My mother's daughter doesn't just work for a check. She works for the truth. I stood in that dark hallway, looking at the note from Jin's mother, and I made a choice. I wouldn't tell Voss what I'd found, and I wouldn't tell Jin. Yet. I was going to play the game. I was going to be the insubordinate guard they all expected me to be. Because if the most dangerous man in the room was the one I was protecting, I needed to make sure I was the most dangerous woman he had ever met. But then, a soft sound came from behind me. "It's a beautiful verse, isn't it?" I turned. Jin was standing there, his coat off, His sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms covered in faint, white lines, scars from a life I was only beginning to understand. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the frame. "My mother died believing I was a good man," he said quietly. He finally looked at me, and the intensity in his gaze was enough to make the air leave my lungs. "Tell me, Jennifer, do you think a person can become something they never were just to honor a ghost?" I didn't have an answer, because in that moment, I realized the danger wasn't just the men in the parking garage. The real danger was the way my heart beat faster when he said my name. The Imperial Gala was exactly what I expected, a room full of people who used their wealth like a weapon. They didn't hit you. They just looked through you until you felt like you didn't exist. I was standing 2 steps behind Sungjin Park. My hand was resting near my belt, my eyes scanning the crowd. To everyone else, I was just the help. The diversity hire they whispered about behind their champagne glasses. They didn't realize that being invisible is a bodyguard's greatest superpower. At 9:47 p.m. I saw him, Harlan Voss. He wasn't supposed to be there. Voss was a recruiter, a middleman who lived in the shadows of offices, not the light of ballrooms. But there he was, leaning against a marble pillar, looking perfectly at home. I didn't move. I didn't even let my heart rate change. I just tracked him. For 22 minutes, I watched him work the room like a politician. He moved with a practiced warmth, shaking hands and nodding, but his eyes never stopped moving. He found Jin twice in that window. He didn't turn his head. He just used his peripheral vision, checking Jin's location like a hunter checking a trap. Then I saw the connection. Voss stopped near the East Bar and whispered something to 2 men. I recognized one of them from the files I'd spent all night digging through, Marcus Yoon, a man with a criminal record longer than my arm and ties to the very organization Jin was supposed to be partnered with. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt thin. I looked at Jin. He was standing there holding a glass of water, listening to a billionaire mock his modest business holdings. Jin didn't defend himself. He didn't even look annoyed. He just stood there in that terrifying silence, letting them underestimate him. That's when it clicked. The danger wasn't coming from across the room. It was already inside the circle. Voss hadn't hired me to protect Jin. He had hired me to be a witness to a murder he was planning. We got back to the penthouse at 1:00 a.m. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. I knew I should tell him. I should tell him I saw Voss. I should tell him about Marcus Yoon. But something stopped me. I remembered what Jin said about keeping the seeing until he told me the truth. He sat there, his jacket off, his white shirt crisp against the dark leather of his chair. He didn't ask me how the night went. He didn't ask if I'd noticed anything strange. He just watched me. It was a test. I could feel it in the way he tracked the movement of my hands, the way he waited for me to break first. He wanted to see if I was his, or if I belonged to the man who signed my paychecks. "You're thinking about the ballroom," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about the seating chart," I lied. It seemed intentional. A small, cold smile touched his lips. "Everything in my world is intentional, Jennifer. Even the people who think they are playing me are just actors in a script I wrote years ago." He stood up and walked around the desk. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of me. He was so close I could see the faint pulse in his neck. "Harlan Voss thinks he bought you," Jin whispered. "He thinks you're the desperate girl who needs the money more than her morals. He's waiting for you to call him tonight and tell him I'm vulnerable." My blood went cold. He knew. He had known the whole time. "I don't work for him," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know," Jin replied. He reached out, his fingers grazing the sleeve of my jacket, right where my grandfather's watch sat underneath. "But the world is going to ask you to choose very soon. And when you do, remember this. The man they think I am is a monster. The man I actually am is much worse." He walked away then, leaving me standing in the dark. I realized that my moral cause and effect was spinning out of control. I had set out to protect a man from a poison drink, But I was realizing that the man himself might be the most lethal thing in the room. Let's be honest for a second. We all like to think we'd be the hero. We think we'd see the betrayal and shout it from the rooftops. But what do you do when the person you're supposed to save is just as dangerous as the ones trying to kill him? If you've ever felt trapped between two impossible choices, if you've ever stayed loyal to someone who didn't deserve it just because your heart wouldn't let you walk away, subscribe. Don't just watch this as a story. Join us, because in the next chapter, the first drop of blood hits the floor, and you'll finally see why they say kindness is the most expensive mistake you can ever make. I wasn't looking for his secrets. I've always been a person who respects boundaries, mostly because I know how much it hurts when someone crosses mine. But the universe has a funny way of dropping the truth at your feet when you least expect it. I was cleaning up a spill of personnel files in Sung Jin's study when I saw it. It was a photograph, worn at the edges and creased right down the middle, like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times in the dark. It was a woman. She was black, with a close-cropped natural and a smile that looked like it didn't know how to be afraid. She was wearing hospital scrubs, laughing at whoever was holding the camera in a hallway that looked hauntingly familiar. I turned it over. In Jin's sharp, precise handwriting it said, "Myray, Cook County, 2009. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. Cook County Hospital was where my mother worked. 2009 was the year my world started to shift, but that wasn't the part that made my hands shake. It was the face. She didn't look exactly like me, but she looked like who I am. She had the same seeing in her eyes, the same stubborn set of her jaw. That's when the silence in the penthouse started to make sense. For weeks, I thought Sungjin was watching me because I was a threat, or maybe because he was curious. But looking at that photo, I realized the truth was much more uncomfortable. He wasn't looking at me at all. He was looking at a ghost. He was looking for a version of himself that died in 2011 on the I-90, and I was just the mirror he was using to find the pieces. The air between us changed after I found that photo. It became thicker, harder to breathe. We were headed to a meeting at a place called Club Noir, but the GPS coordinates Jin gave me didn't match the ones on the official schedule Harlan Voss had sent. "You changed the venue," I said quietly, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror. "I changed the destination," Jin corrected. "Voss thinks we're heading to the harbor. He has people waiting there, people who were told you would be distracted." He turned his head then, and for the first time, the Mafia boss mask was completely gone. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep can fix, but the kind that comes from carrying a lie for a decade. "Tell me, Jennifer," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper. "Why didn't you take the money?" I gripped the steering wheel. "What money?" "The intermediary who approached you 3 days ago. The one who offered you twice your contract rate to take a personal night this evening. I had him followed. I waited for you to pack your bags, but you stayed." The silence in the car was deafening. He had been testing me again. Every move, every interaction was a trap designed to see if my moral core was real or just a performance. "I stayed because I don't leave people in the dark," I said, my voice cracking just enough for him to hear. "Not even people who treat loyalty like a game." Jin didn't say anything for a long time. He just reached out and placed his hand on the back of my seat, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the heat. "Voss is going to move tonight," he said. "He thinks he's the one setting the trap, but he doesn't realize I've already closed the door. The question is, when the green drink flies, Jennifer, who are you really protecting, me or the woman in that photograph?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the pressure was at a boiling point. We were pulling up to Club Noir, and I could see the neon "open" sign flickering like a warning. Tonight, the cause and effect of my life were finally going to collide. And I had a feeling that no matter who won, I was going to be the one left picking up the pieces. The air inside Club Noir smelled like expensive perfume and cheap secrets. I was standing in my usual spot, 2 paces behind Sungjin, scanning the room. But tonight, the seeing in my eyes felt like a curse. Every shadow looked like a person waiting, and every smile looked like a blade hidden in silk. Then I saw him, the new bartender. He was moving with a rhythm that didn't match the music. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I've spent 11 years memorizing how bodies move. He had a slight drag in his left leg, a detail that wasn't in the staff files I'd spent all night studying. He wasn't a bartender, he was a plant. The mistreatment in the room was reaching a breaking point. The wealthy men at the table were ignoring me, talking over me, and purposely bumping into my shoulder as they walked by. One of them even tried to hand me his empty glass like I was the help. I swallowed the fire in my throat. I knew what they were doing. They wanted me to cause a scene so security would have a reason to throw me out. They wanted Jin unprotected. I looked at Jin. He was sitting there, his face as calm as deep water, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He knew. He knew the room was closing in. He knew the man with the limp wasn't there to serve drinks. But he just sat there, letting them treat him like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. It was the ultimate test of my patience and his life. The martini glass was already moving before my brain could even authorize the why. It was green, not the soft green of a lime or an olive. It was a chemical neon green, the kind of color that shouldn't exist inside a glass meant for a human being. It caught the red neon light from the sign above the bar, and for exactly 1 second it was almost beautiful. Dangerous things usually are, right before they finish what they started. Sung Jin's fingers were closing around the stem. I didn't think about my contract. I didn't think about the insubordination charge that had cost me my last job. I just moved. My hand came down across the bar like a gavel hitting a desk. Stop. The music seemed to stutter. The room went dead silent. The glass didn't just tip, it detonated. That green liquid sprayed into the air, a violent explosion that stained my jacket sleeve and soaked into the white lapel of Jin's $4,000 suit. It looked like an accusation painted in poison. The bartender ran. I didn't chase him. I grabbed Jin by the collar of his suit and pulled him below the bar line, my body shielding his. Down! Stay down! Don't speak. And then the most terrifying thing of the entire night happened. Sungjin Park, the man who makes the city tremble, the man who never takes orders from anyone, he obeyed. He went quiet. He stayed down. He trusted me with the only thing he had left, his life. Let's get real for a second. How many times have you seen something green in your own life? A red flag, a lie, a person who meant you harm, and you reached for the glass anyway because you didn't want to make a scene? How many times have you let your fear of being difficult keep you from being safe? If you've ever had to be the shield for someone who didn't even realize they were in danger, if you've ever lost everything just to keep your soul intact, subscribe. Don't just watch this as a story. Join us. Because in the next chapter, the secret behind why Jin obeyed is going to reveal a truth that will break your heart. You aren't going to want to miss the moment the Mafia boss finally stops running from the woman in the photograph. The corridor was narrow, lit by that sickly amber emergency light that makes everything look like an old bruise. I still had my hand on his arm, not a gentle touch, but a functional one, steering him toward the service exit while my eyes scanned every shadow for a second attacker. The bartender was a plant, I said, my voice sounding like gravel. I flagged his credentials this morning. I just needed to see who was pulling the strings before I moved. Sungjin stopped walking. He didn't pull away, but the air around him suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. He looked at me with that blackwater stillness that usually makes men twice my size start sweating. Harlan Voss, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I replied. Voss is the one who hired me, but he's the one who wanted you dead tonight. Jin didn't look surprised. He looked disappointed, the way a person looks when a math equation doesn't add up. He told me then that he'd known Voss was compromised for months. He'd been using the recruiter to feed fake schedules to his enemies. But tonight, someone had leaked the real location. Someone on the inside. I offered you a way out, Jennifer, he whispered, stepping closer until I could see the green poison stain on his white lapel. The man who approached you at the cafe last week, the one who offered you double your salary to take a sick day today, that was my man. I wanted to see if your integrity had a price tag. My heart hammered against my ribs. He'd been testing me while I was busy trying to save his life. The moral weight of it felt like a physical blow. I didn't stay for the money. I didn't stay because I liked him. I'm my mother's daughter, Jin, I said, meeting his gaze. I don't leave the room when the light starts fading, not for any amount of money. We retreated to the back office, a room that smelled of old paper and leather. Jin sat at the manager's desk, his jacket off, looking less like a boss and more like a man who had been running for 15 years and finally ran out of road. The photo in your study, I said. The words felt heavy, like I was dropping stones into a deep well. Myrae. The name landed in the room with a thud. Jin's expression didn't shatter, but it bent. I'd seen him face down men with guns without blinking, but the mention of that name made his hands tremble just a fraction. She was a nurse, he said finally. His voice was distant, like he was talking about a dream he'd had a lifetime ago. Cook County Hospital, 2009. I was there on business I'm not proud of. She was the only person in a decade who spoke to me like I was a person, not a position. He told me how she found out what he was. Not all of it, but enough. She didn't run. She didn't call the police. She just looked him in the eye and told him she would pray for him every single day until he found a reason to be someone worth praying for. She died in 2011, a car accident on the I-90, the same year I dropped out of law school to become a shield. She looked like you, I whispered, thinking about the woman in the scrubs. No, Jin corrected, standing up and walking over to me. He stopped so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. She didn't look like you. She felt like you. That stubbornness. That inability to look away from someone who's hurting, even when they're the one holding the knife. In that moment, the space between us shifted. It wasn't about the job anymore. It wasn't about the mafia or the money. It was about the fact that he'd spent years building walls, and I was the first person who didn't just try to climb them. I was the person who realized the walls were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. But here's the thing about ghosts. They don't just haunt the people who loved them. They haunt the people who replaced them. And as Jin looked at me, I realized I wasn't just his bodyguard. I was his second chance. And second chances in his world usually come with a body count. The air in the back office felt like it was made of lead. Outside, the world was screaming, but inside this room, the silence was heavy enough to crush you. I looked at the man I had just shielded with my own body, and for the first time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a man who had spent the last 7 years building a house of cards just so he could be the one to light the match. The police are outside, Jin, I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was doing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Voss is gone, he's running. Jin didn't look up. He was staring at that green stain on his lapel with a terrifying focus. He won't get far, he whispered. Harlan Voss thinks he's the one who betrayed me. He doesn't realize that I've been feeding him the rope to hang himself since the day I hired you. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a mafia hit that went wrong. It was a calculated sacrifice. Jin hadn't been hiding from the criminal network that employed him. He had been documenting them. Every transaction, every name, every life they had broken. It was all in a file that was already in the hands of the federal prosecutors. You're the whistleblower, I breathed. The dangerous man I was protecting wasn't trying to save his empire. He was dismantling it from the inside out. He finally looked at me. His eyes were dark, hollowed out by a decade of secrets. I am the case, Jennifer. Everything they need to bury this organization leads back to me. 2003 to 2015. I built a throne out of bones, and now I'm the one pulling the bottom brick. The moral weight of it made the room feel like it was shrinking. He had hired me, the outsider with the hyper-vigilant moral core, because he knew I wouldn't let him take the easy way out. He needed a shield long enough to finish the testimony that would end his life as he knew it. He wasn't looking for a bodyguard. He was looking for a witness to his own ending. 3 weeks later, justice didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a cold Tuesday morning in November. I sat in the 4th row of the federal courthouse, my hands folded in my lap. I wasn't on the clock. My contract had ended the second the feds took Jin into protective custody, but I couldn't look away. I'm genetically incapable of it. When Sung-Jin Park walked into that courtroom, the silence was so loud it made my ears ring. Every heavy hitter in the city was there, watching from the gallery. Harlan Voss sat at the defense table, his expensive suit looking like a shroud. He tried to lock eyes with Jin, but Jin didn't even acknowledge he was in the room. Jin took the stand. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the judge. He just spoke. For 4 straight hours, he dismantled a decades-old criminal empire with the surgical precision of a man who had memorized every sin he'd ever committed. I watched the faces of the men in the gallery. These were the same people who had laughed at him, mocked his silence, and treated him like he was invisible. Now, they were realizing that the quiet man had been the architect of their downfall all along. It was a social status reversal, so violent it felt like a dopamine spike in my veins. But the payoff was bittersweet. As the judge hammered the gavel and the room erupted into controlled chaos, reality set in. Justice is a cold meal. Voss was led away in handcuffs, screaming about loyalty, but Jin just sat there, waiting for his own turn to be processed. He had won the war, but he had lost his freedom to do it. I waited by the side exit as they let him out. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second through the glass of the door. There was no apology in his gaze, no romantic promise, just a quiet, resonant acknowledgement. He had done the doing, and I had done the seeing. "You found it," I whispered as the guards moved him past. He stopped just for a heartbeat. "Found what, Jennifer?" "The reason to become someone worth praying for." He didn't smile. Jin doesn't do that. But for the first time, the stillness in his eyes didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the end of a long, dark night. They say that justice is blind, but I think it's just tired. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I didn't even know I was carrying. Voss was in handcuffs. The network was in ruins. And Sung-Jin, he was headed to a place where his name wouldn't mean anything anymore. I had no job, no contract, and exactly $42 in my checking account. Most people would call that a failure. But as I stood on those steps, I realized that for the first time in my life, my ledger was balanced. I hadn't looked away. I hadn't taken the easy exit. I had done the doing that my mother always talked about. I opened the box and my breath hitched. There it was, my grandfather's gold watch, the same one I had pawned for $340 just to keep the lights on. There was no note, no grand confession of love, just the steady, rhythmic ticking of a heart that refused to stop. Jin didn't give me a bag of money or a diamond ring. He gave me back my history. He gave me back the one thing I had sacrificed to stay in his world. It was the ultimate cause and effect. I had protected his life, and in return, he had protected my dignity. People ask me if I regret it, if I regret losing my career for a man who lived in the dark. I just tell them what my mother told me. If God put the seeing in your eyes, he put the doing in your hands. Sometimes the people the world ignores are the ones quietly deciding its fate. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who finally sees you back. We've reached the end of Jennifer and Jin's story, but the truth is, this story is happening every day. Right now, someone is being tested. Someone is deciding whether to keep their head down or to stand up and break the glass. I want you to look at your own hands for a second. Are they empty because you were afraid to act, or are they full of the things you've fought for? If this story moved you, if you believe that kindness isn't a weakness, but the rarest kind of power, then don't just walk away. Subscribe. Join this community of people who refuse to look away from the truth. Leave a comment with the word SHIELD if you've ever stood up for someone when it cost you everything. Your subscription isn't just a click. It's a vote for stories that prove integrity still matters. Because somewhere out there, another woman is choosing goodness in silence. And by being here, you're making sure her story is finally heard. Thank you for watching.